Day 611 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzy here, and today is a super quick update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 297,000 military personnel losses there, with an additional 560 in the past 24 hours. Then as for hardware losses, 4 tanks, 11 APVs, and an underwhelmingly unwhopping 7 artillery losses. And I always do find it interesting how figures on the board are usually something of a delayed indicator to events on the ground, whether there be lessened or heightened activity. Oh, and add to that, I would argue that both sides are playing the war of attrition game in this conflict. Although, disproportionately, only one side has unfettered access to the global production supply chains, that side of course being Ukraine. And not just access to those markets, but also usually donated aid from those markets or countries. Meanwhile, the Russian situation is almost the exact opposite, as they've largely been stamped out of the global supply chain from sanctions. And when they do access those markets for key components for military equipment, they usually not only pay for it, but pay a premium for it in order to receive those goods through unsanctioned third-party countries. So it's just not a good position for an attritional warfare country to be in. Not at all. Then we'll head across to the map today for some shorter updates. So let's see. Okay, here we go. So as for some updates relating to those ATACMS missiles from yesterday in Luhansk, with new information appearing to signal that the AFU hit 2 to 3 S-400 air defense systems. And realistically, that would mean something equivalent to 2 or 3 S-400 launches, plus some various support vehicles associated with those battery complexes. And hey, even the Russian Z Telegram channels began to ridicule the outright lies of the Russian Ministry of Defense, where the Russian MOD had initially stated that they neutralized that missile threat. And there's just so many implications to situations like these, because if indeed ATACMS took out a bunch of S-400 systems, then make no mistake, as that would specifically mean that an almost decommissioned, stockpiled 25-year-old ATACMS ballistic missile destroyed a Russian S-400 anti-ballistic missile air defense system, of which is Russia's most highly vaunted, highly praised, and fielded air defense system that they have. So obviously not a good look. And one way or another, you can bet that Russian air defense systems are being targeted as per shaping operations that lead up to the introduction of the upcoming F-16 fighter jets into Ukraine, which, with Russian air defenses suppressed, will only lead to greater effect for the F-16 Fighting Falcon deliveries, with possibly a handful slated to be received in late December time this year. Then moving along on the map, a bit further south there, so we saw Russian vehicles clearing mines in the Avdiivka direction. Although I should better clarify what I just said, as they weren't using mine clearing vehicles, but rather their own front assault tanks and various infantry fighting vehicles to accidentally get the job done. But what's even more disturbing is how the Ukrainian drone operator, over the audio feed of this footage, mentioned that the Russian units were rolling over their own anti-tank mines when withdrawing after they realized what they'd gotten themselves into. What a dumpster fire of a situation. And embarrassingly, it's not even the first time that something like this has happened. It's happened many, many times that I can count, more than I can count, as a result of what is likely severely or critically untrained Russian conscripts as they get ordered into battle. And yet, still, Russia is not stopping with these forward movement attempts in the north and the south of the region, despite the heavy losses to take Avdiivka by pulling infantry from the northern Donbass, Kupiansk direction and throwing in various reserves into battle indiscriminately there as well, as Russia very much still appears to be on this hellbent mission to consolidate as much land as they possibly can, particularly in this Donbass region, before the wet season kicks in. Although on certain days it already has, as here we can see the weather in the region with the rainy days for today and tomorrow, then later next week. And since we're almost in November now, these weather patterns will only become more pronounced, and the muddy season will put a pause on any advances on the map, which would certainly infuriate Putin because, well, I'm willing to bet that Putin himself previously looked at the frontline Donbass map, say a month or two ago, and considered the winter pause, the upcoming pause, coupled with his quote-unquote re-election early next year in Russia, then pointed to the map to request or command to fill in the frontline gap at this location, with very limited considerations for how well it's defended. Also, probably no considerations for the loss of Russian life or equipment. Just forcing that command on yes man Shoigu or Gerasimov to take it at all costs. And that might sound like a joke, but this really appears to be how the military decision-making protocols and processes have played out, so far as we've often seen with the Russian army's choice on strategy implementation. Then we'll head across to Kherson for just a moment, as Russia has been seen shelling close to Kherson city itself. But also, 2 Russian tanks were destroyed, along with an assault group south of Krinky beyond the Dnipro. But the larger ongoing actions here at the moment is from Ukrainian forces conducting various landing operations from the north of the river to the south, as they look to set up or expand bridgeheads, but also to support elements of the Ukrainian army that are already stationed on the southern side. And once Ukraine sets up a well dug in and well fortified position on the south, or multiple positions I should say, they will never give them up. Then we'll head to Crimea for a moment, as there's some interesting developments that relate to Ukraine's longer-range ATACMS missiles capabilities now. So, Ukrainian partisans known as the Atesh Group, based in occupied Crimea, claim that after weeks of catastrophic losses of Russian helicopters due to those ATACMS missiles, that Russia is quickly moving its equipment in the peninsula to avoid further strikes. Now, the Atesh Group state that they've got Ukrainian partisans everywhere, and not just in Crimea, but also, for instance, the Donbass and in Russia itself. But as for Crimea, they've said that the Russian army is hiding equipment near Crimean railway stations and transporting them mainly at night to avoid detection to the front lines. So the Russian concern here is the ATACMS 165-kilometer ranged missile introduction, which really has spooked their army, the Russian military. And thus, once again, this has forever changed the logistical dynamics of this war. Then moving across to a quick couple of bits of news today, and then a funny. So the US recently announced a new $150 million security aid package for Ukraine that includes things like the NASAMS AIM-9M Sidewinder air defense missiles, Stinger missiles, HIMARS missiles, TOW missiles, Javelin missiles, and 155mm and 105mm artillery rounds, among other things. So truly, it's an existing missile platform ammunition sustainment package for many systems that Ukraine didn't even have 12 or 18 months ago. Then in some other news, yesterday, Ukrainian President Zelensky approved a law increasing the financial oversight of political figures in Ukraine, and laws like these are a crucial move towards Ukraine's ambition to join the EU. So the law extends the oversight time of government officials, their financials, due to them being at a higher risk of corruption as a result of their political positions. And naturally, most people are very supportive of Ukrainian anti-corruption endeavors, as oversight steps like these are vital for Ukraine's later ascension into NATO, as they release themselves from the remnants of the corrupt Soviet ties from the past, which is truly a national mindset that all post-Soviet EU nations had to rectify as well. So it's certainly welcome news. Then moving across to a bit of a pre-funny or a lighter segment today, combination of the two really. So mice have been running rampant in Russian trenches due to the cooling of the seasonal weather. And talk about an infestation from this Russian footage. And I once said that the animals have chosen their side in this war. Although it's probably more succinct to say that the Ukrainian forces have time and time again extended that hand of compassion towards their little feline friends, taking them in as pets with feeding and caring for them. As such, that loving bond clearly has its benefits for keeping Ukrainian underground fortifications no place for mice to be. Then, as for a final funny to round it all off with today, guys, so spotted in the field was this BTRD APV, which is an old Soviet designed small tracked wheeled vehicle, which is perhaps similar to or a cheaper version of the old BMP-1 Soviet infantry fighting vehicle. Except this one has even less armor and doesn't contain any significant armament. Well, that was then, and this is now, because someone decided to add not one, but two 86mm 2B9 automatic mortars, one on each end. But first of all, you need 3 people to operate each mortar. So questions arise about the BTRD's capacity to support crew for both weapons simultaneously. But even if they could, there's serious doubts about being able to fire these 56-year-old dual mortars in the same direction at the same time. So as you can clearly see, we are fast approaching the Mad Max stage of Russian weapons development. Although to be entirely frank, we passed that stage a long time ago. So that's it for today, guys. Just a quick shout out to the new subscribers from yesterday. I did notice you. Really just taking me up on that deal, just to stick around for a little bit. So I do appreciate that. And thanks again to everyone. Please comment and like, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.